Hi, it's Catherine Franke. It's June 18th, and today was a big day in law. Supreme Court issued a decision in the Skrmetti case, finding that there was no constitutional problem with the state of Tennessee enacting a blanket ban on trans children or minors receiving gender-affirming care, even if their doctor prescribes it, even if their parents support it, even if the child wants it. The court said no constitutional problem there. And indeed, if you read the Chief Justice Roberts' opinion, it's as if trans people are invisible. They're just not legible to the court. That decision didn't come as a huge surprise. It's still a gut punch, but it didn't come as a huge surprise. So we still have a lot of work to do in the area of trans rights or just trans dignity. But what I wanted to take a moment to talk about today was an oral argument that took place in California in the Ninth Circuit this afternoon. The Ninth Circuit is the intermediate appellate court that oversees all the federal courts in California and in that region. And this is the case where Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, brought a challenge to Trump's decision to nationalize the National Guard and bring them in to quell protests in Los Angeles. So Newsom's argument is that Trump didn't have the authority to do it, to nationalize them. There was no invasion or rebellion, which is required for the federalization of the National Guard, and that the Los Angeles police and the governor in his powers could have handled those protests. So the argument in the Ninth Circuit took place today. It didn't go all that well, I would say, for Governor Newsom. Many court watchers are saying that we may lose this one 3-0. So the appellate courts are almost always 3 judges, so 3-0. 2 Trump-appointed judges, 1 not Trump-appointed. But the problem is there is an 1827 Supreme Court decision in a case called Martin versus Mott that is kind of decides the case, and intermediate appellate courts don't have the power to overrule a prior case that is, as we say, is right on point and controlling. So this issue, if it's decided the way I think we all think it will be, which is where Newsom will lose and Trump will win, in the Ninth Circuit will go to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court will have to decide whether Martin versus Mott, this 1827 decision, controls the outcome today. So what's Martin versus Mott about? It's actually quite relevant because the circumstances in which that case came up are not hugely dissimilar to what we're dealing with today. So this is a case about the power of the president, in the case of Martin, James Madison, to mobilize or federalize state militias, they were called then, but the National Guard in various states to fight in the War of 1812. So, what was the War of 1812 about? Anyone remember? High school history, social studies? So just as a little reminder, this is a war basically challenging British trade embargoes, trade restrictions against the United States. So that's similar. Also, it was a war, the underlying purpose of which was to combat Native American people who were defending the expansion of the United States into what was called the Northwest Territories at that time, and the annexation of, yes, Canada. So Native people were resisting that. The British had sovereignty of a sort over Canada, and so the War of 1812 was to implicate both trade policy with Britain, but also colonialism, U.S. and British colonialism in North America. Kind of similar to what we're dealing with today. So this guy, Jacob Mott, who has lived in New York, said, I don't want to show up. He was in the New York National Guard. He said, I don't want to fight this war. I am a war resistor. I don't agree with the president's conclusion that we are either in a rebellion or an invasion, and that that I have to serve to fight this war I disagree with. So he was court-martialed. He was found guilty. He was fined $96, which, was a lot of money in 1818, where, back when the court-martial took place. And he either had to pay the $96 or serve a year in jail. So what the government decided to do was seize his property, worth $96, which for him was a horse. So the case goes to the Supreme Court of Mott challenging the government's right to seize his horse, but really the underlying issue is, did the president have the authority to federalize the New York State National Guard to fight the War of 1812? Supreme Court rules, and here I'll give you a quote from it, "We are all of the opinion that the authority to decide whether the exigency has arisen," the one required by the law, "it belongs exclusively to the president, and that his decision is conclusive upon all other persons," meaning the federal court cannot review the president's judgment that there is a sufficient emergency to nationalize state troops. And so this is the argument that the Justice Department relied on today, is that the government, President Trump's decision, right or wrong, agree with it or don't agree with it, federal court agree with it or disagree with it, that power to decide that we're in a rebellion or an invasion, thus giving him the power to nationalize the National Guard or federalize the National Guard, is his alone and unreviewable. So this is very worrisome. This is a part of a larger project of what they call the unitary presidency, the very strong authority of the president to make decisions on his or her own that are unreviewable by Congress or the judiciary. So it's an attack on the whole idea of shared governance, limited authority among each of those branches of government. And so this case is going to go to the Supreme Court, and the question will be whether Trump has the authority, unchecked by the courts, the Congress, to decide that the situation in Los Angeles was desperate enough, an exigency enough, that he could federalize the National Guard, and no one can challenge him on that. I'm really worried about this case. You should be too. Watch for a decision from the Ninth Circuit, but I think you can be sure it will go to the Supreme Court. And this court has been willing to give the president, not just Trump, but often Trump, an awful lot of authority.